Oh my gosh, there's so much more in the book. There's so many things from you as a rap musician, sort of in the underground hip hop scene.
For sure.
A bunch of folks that you were connected with back then
that are really big time now.
Yeah. And so, you work through some of those things. Let's do this. Let's drive ahead just a little bit further. When is it that you begin to see God's doing something?
Yeah, so I'm clean. I'm out of prison, right? And so I've successfully re-entered society up until this point. Like, I've been out of prison 3 months, I think, and I'm living at a Kemp-Free house.
Yep.
I'm clean, but I'm living dirty. And so what I mean by that is I'm not using, but I'm still living wrong.
Sure.
And so there's this common misconception that when the drugs are gone, you're in recovery. And that's not true.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't start recovering until you start addressing the behavior patterns.
Oh, that's good.
The core beliefs. You don't start recovery until you start growing spiritually, mentally, and physically.
That's good.
And so I'm in my Kemp-Free house. A friend of mine from the streets is my roommate, and he's selling dope. And so now I'm selling dope, clean. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to meetings, I'm sharing, I'm trying to stay clean, but I'm putting this bad stuff out. You know what I mean? And I woke up one morning and my roommate was just staring at me. And he's got a pistol and a pound of methamphetamines in my Kemp-Free house. And so at this point, it was like God just... It was like curtains, literally. I don't know any way to explain it. I didn't see anything wrong with what I had been doing until that morning. And it was like God said, if you want to stay clean and live the life I have for you, you have to make a choice, and you have to make it now. And so from that second on, it was over.
And in your book, you're pretty clear that it wasn't like you were seeking God or anything like that. It wasn't.
Not at that point. No.
Not. It was one of those things where He's seeking you.
Yeah.
And even the DVD thing and Captain Kirk Lane, the story with that and how he was the guy that you needed to interrupt this cycle that you're in. God's active in all those kind of things. I mean, you can see it in retrospect. At the time, you weren't going, oh, wow, look what God's doing in my life. You're like, oh, heck, I'm caught. It's going to kind of slow me down or whatever. And even at this moment, it wasn't something you were looking for, but God kind of opened your eyes to it. I think that's really, really huge. What happens next?
Next is I get on fire for recovery. I meet Chelsea, my wife, and she's going through a really dark time in her recovery. And so this is our first date, right? Like, we go to Waffle House.
Great pick.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have anything but some drug money. So
All-Star Special.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. And so I'm still unmanageable. I don't know how to live. My core beliefs are still corrupt. The only thing I've got going is I'm not getting high. It's the only thing I've done good. That's the only perfect thing I've done since I found recovery and gave my life to God.
Sure.
And so Chelsea shares, we go to Waffle House, we eat, we're on the way back, and she shares this dark place that she's been in. And I don't know what made me blurt it out. It could have been the fact that she trusted me and she was hurting, and I could see that she was hurting. And so I wanted to share something intimate with her that I wouldn't tell anybody else. I said, well, I've been dealing dope. And she's like, oh, what?
Plot twist.
Yeah. I'm like, well, I thought we was sharing bad stuff. And she's like, you need to call your sponsor right now. And so I didn't call him. When I was working on a fourth step, and so I slide it in there. I put it in my fourth step. I jot it down on paper, and I give it to him. And of course, we talk about it, and so and she tells me immediately, she's like, thank God that you told me that before you got high. You can't do that. Like, we will get high, you will die, you will go back to prison. And that was pretty much the confirmation that I needed, because that's what I felt like God was telling me in my room.
That's huge.
And, shortly after that, she brought me here to that church.
Yeah.
And, we started coming to church, and it was lukewarm. And, God says he hates lukewarm.
You bet.
And so, we're coming here and there, and then we start, coming with Point Man, and it's like everything starts just shaping.
Sure.
And, I only had 9 months clean at this time. 6 months of that was in prison. So I only knew how to live one way.
Sure.
You're trying to break 38 years of behavior patterns. And nobody, I'm just living in this Kim Free house, and I've got a pending drug charge. I think I'm going back to prison. By all rights, I should have, and God intervenes. And so I start seeing God working.
You bet.
Right? I've got somebody in my life that I'm hanging on to, who's got longer time in recovery than me, telling me that if you do that stupid stuff, all right, this is what's going to happen. And so it really made me step my game up.
You bet.
And so by the time I've got a year clean, I'm on fire. There's this transition, there's this shift of perception that happens from 9 months to 1 year for me.
You bet.
I've made a thorough conscious decision, and I've accepted the fact that I'm going back to prison for my pending drug charge.
You bet.
But I've made a decision to go clean.
You bet.
I don't care that I got to go. I don't want to go high. And so I start the recovery process, and I'm putting pen to paper, and I'm unpacking 38 years of sexual abuse, trauma, physical abuse, neglect, mental abuse, you name it. All the fires that I've been touched by, I'm writing about them. And there was something very therapeutic when I was writing about that. And I'm sharing it. And later on, I start seeing the biblical principles. And I'm not going to talk about what program I work. I'm not here to endorse any specific program, but I want to leave things anonymous, right? So I'm unpacking. They're telling me I need to go over all this stuff with another person. And then I start seeing the biblical principles in what I'm doing. And in this culture, it's not really acceptable to bring your faith into it, right?
You bet.
But I'm seeing that, okay, so step 4 and 5 is actually James, the book of James, where God's telling me confess my sins to another believer, a like-minded person who can pray with me, and the prayers of an effective person are God's moved by, and they're effective.
That's right.
And so I'm like, man, everything's starting to shape up, and I'm starting to see it. And so I'm on fire. I'm everywhere. I'm telling my story. And so because of my music career, which I had at one time thought I was destined, look at the people in the pictures in the book with me. They're the names in the rap game today.
You betcha.
So had I not continued to stick a syringe in my arm, I would be right there with them today. And I wouldn't know the freedom or the love that I have.
Wow.
Right. But what God was doing was using that creativity and that stage presence and that delivery, all the stuff that I was learning, performing in front of 500 or 600, 700 people at a time. He was preparing me for this.
You bet.
He was preparing me to be a public speaker on recovery. He was preparing me to be a preacher.
That's right.
And so, fears that most normal people have, the number one fear in the world is public speaking.
That's right. That's right.
The least feared thing, Scott, is death. That means you would rather be the person in the casket than the guy giving the eulogy.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And so I don't feel that way. I feel like I'm in the one place God created for me when I'm on stage.